Howdy, partner. You rascal, you little devil, you. And welcome to another episode of Crizzy Books. I'm Crizzy, or Chris, but only my homeboys call me Chris. And today, I'm going to be doing a review for Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I'm a big fan of Cormac McCarthy and his work. Everything that I've read by him, I have thoroughly enjoyed. I could easily count him as one of my favorite authors ever. But this one, Blood Meridian, has always intimidated me. I tried to read it about 10 years ago and failed miserably. I remember nothing about what I read, but I'm older and I'm wiser now, I think, and I was determined to finish it this time and to read what is probably the most notorious of his books. People tend to really love it or really hate it, and I think that's because it's quite different from everything else that he writes, more descriptive, maybe a little more philosophical. Some would call it boring, or that the narrative is just not that entertaining or great, and you probably wouldn't be wrong. But from my perspective, I think that this is a truly great novel, one of the greatest books I've ever read. Yeah, let's just get into it. In Blood Meridian, we follow the kid who is a sort of drifter, a loner. He can hold himself in fights. He enlists in the army to go to Mexico to fight Mexicans, kind of just by happenstance. And on the way there, him and his fellow soldiers are fell upon by a roaming band of bloodthirsty Comanches who kill everyone except for the kid and one other guy. And the kid wanders with his other survivor through the Mexican desert until finally they end up in Chihuahua, where they meet up with a gang of scalp hunters. They join their ranks, and then this gang travels through Mexico, brutally killing every single thing in its path. And like I said, I truly loved this. I thought it was fantastic. I ended up loving it a lot more than I thought I would. And I think that this book's strengths don't really lie in its narrative, but it is what's below the surface that truly make this great. And it's been a long time since I've read something that truly had something more to say other than what it was actually saying to me. It's full of themes and symbolism, and I think that those themes and symbolism are really well done. But that being said, it can be hard to follow sometimes. It can be a little overly descriptive, but overall, I think it's amazing, and I think it totally lives up to the hype. So let's get into my actual, more deep, spoiler-filled thoughts about Blood Meridian. We're going to be talking for a while here, I think, which is not what I was intending. Normally, my reviews are not long like this. In terms of the writing style, McCarthy is one of my favorite writers because he is able to describe things very simplistically and beautifully. And his themes and plots are always interesting. Everything he writes about has some kind of unique, interesting thing about it that always draws me in. And he doesn't pull punches, and he's not afraid to touch on subjects that would be deemed too edgy, maybe too taboo. And this is probably easily the most difficult of his books, at least that I've read. This mostly reads like a classic lit book than more of a modern novel. He really does go buck wild with the descriptions on this one, which is kind of opposite of what I really love about him. I'd say that mostly it's fine and it works really well, but sometimes left me a little bored or confused. And there are even points where there's certain long drawn out descriptive parts, especially of Mexico and the landscape and the men just trotting through it. And while these parts are pretty boring and brutal to get through, they also mirror what's happening. And I'm sure that traveling through the Mexican desert is probably also brutal and boring. And so you kind of feel the same way. I can totally understand why someone would not like this. It can be a lot to take in sometimes, hard to follow. You really have to pay attention. And I found what worked best for me was almost getting into a rhythm of the language and the way that it's written. And that really helped it a lot. Like I said before, I think that the real strength of this book is its themes and its symbolism that are below the surface and diving a little deeper into what is actually being said to you. This book can be and has been dissected for decades for a reason. There is a lot to pick at and a lot to think about, and that's just what makes it so great and so much fun. I think at the center of this, the main theme is one of good and evil. The kid seems to represent basic good, and the gang and the judge represent evil. And this is reflected a lot of ways throughout the story. We never actually see the kid partake in any type of evil behavior that the gang is doing. We're always just hearing it from other gang members and what the gang is doing as a whole. We never hear of the kid doing any of this. And even later in the novel, the kid is going through some kind of redemption arc or something, trying to prove to himself that he's not that kind of an evil guy. By helping a woman in the desert or choosing not to harm members of the gang even. He always just seemed to choose the more compassionate route if he could. One of my favorite parts of the whole book is a part where the kid gets separated from the gang and he's up on this kind of snowy cliff top and he finds the gang and they're fighting some soldiers and he's watching them all fight, and it's this fact that he's up and elevated and almost as a spectator to this evil gang doing their shit, and he's outside of it. And there's several examples of that happening where the kid just seems to be almost an observer. I still think at the end of the day what's so interesting about the kid is while we never hear of him really doing anything bad, he's still with them. And what does that mean? Does that somehow still make him a part of the evil of this gang and a bad person? He's still with them and helping them along, and they're the ones raping and killing everything in sight. And I would say that makes him maybe guilty by association. I don't know. Circling right outside the good and evil theme is also a sense of morality. And what is morality? The judge has a really great speech in this about morality, and I just loved it. He talks about how laws tend to benefit only the weak, and that morality does not exist, almost like this idea of reality is only what you perceive it to be. There is no right and wrong. Right and wrong is whatever you decide. You're essentially the god of your own universe. It's super nihilistic, but it's fitting for this gang that all they do is bring violence and death upon anything in their path until eventually they just meet that end themselves. And why do they do this? For money and booze, for glory, because they just like to kill? Who knows? Who cares? There's also something really interesting that happened a couple times where just random characters will talk about there being life on other planets. Do you think there's life somewhere else? Is it as bad as this? I just thought that was so interesting, especially for the time period. It's just not something that you associate with the Old West and people pondering of alien life somewhere else. And I could go on and on and on, and I will. But this book is just so jam-packed, full of underlying meaning and things to look at and put a microscope up to, and even just come up with your own theories. It's great. It's amazing. Now, when talking about the plot, I actually really enjoyed the surface level of the plot and the narrative of this, of really man's just brutality on himself and nature and trying to conquer everything in his wake. But it's also full of very brutal things like baby smashing and trees made of babies and just very brutal stuff that's actually based in historical fact. If you've never read Empire of the Summer Moon, it's about the Comanche Nation. I highly recommend it. It's one of the few nonfiction books I really love. This is all true. They actually really did some pretty horrible shit. They were no joke. And the brutality of the whole story itself is just classic McCarthy, which I really love. And I think at the time, this was almost considered like an anti-Western Western, because Westerns, you know, everybody just viewed Western as clean John Wayne, fancy rhinestones, and that's not what it was at all. It was not nice. It was not fair. It was bloody and backstabbing and dirty, and death was waiting for you around every turn. Animal abuse abounds in this. I'd say that the worst were probably when Glanton buys some puppies, which I won't go into what he does to them. And then at the end, there's a dancing bear, and a random guy shoots it, and the bear just keeps on dancing until it eventually dies. And That is just the worst. I did not like that at all. It hit me harder than I think a majority of the things that in this book are truly fucked up. Going back to when the kid is separated from the gang and up in these snowy mountains, he comes across a tree that has been struck by lightning and is burning. He goes up to the tree, obviously because he's freezing, and then he's joined by all kinds of critters and creatures of the forest, and they all are standing around this burning tree just getting warm. It's like a scene out of a fucked up Disney movie or something. This is probably my favorite part in the whole book. I don't know why, it just has stuck with me. I love the imagery of it. When doing a little more research about it, I actually found out that this event, this thing, takes place on Christmas Day, which is interesting to think about, you know, a lit up tree sleeping underneath it. There's another part in this where a member of the gang is telling a black member of the gang that he can't sit around the fire with them because he's black, which is a pretty big no-no in this gang. There are no rules and there is no racism or telling people what they can and can't do. And so the black man gets up and he walks away, and this guy, thinking that he's won, is quickly beheaded. And what was really gnarly about this is that they just leave his headless body sitting there. Like, it never moves after his head gets cut off, and they just leave it there in the morning, and it just rots in the sun like that. And that is just like so, yeah, awesome and messed up. I love that the gang finally like got what was coming to them, because they are horrible, horrible people, and they deserve everything that's happening to them. But even in the end, as bad as they got it, and they totally deserved it, it almost didn't feel like enough compared to what they had done. The creek bed standoff, love the tension here. I love the judge baiting the kid. I love the ex-priest trying to bait him in his direction. And I love the idiot on a chain with a collar, like, just such a wild, like, I don't even know how to describe this stuff. It's like just the most like medieval, macabre, like fucked up horror thing you've ever heard. And it's the Old West, and it's crazy. And now we get to everybody's favorite part to talk about. It's the ending. And I love the ending of this. I love how ambiguous it is. I love how many questions that it leaves. I love the theories that it spawns. I have some of my own. The relationship between the kid and the judge is so interesting all throughout this book. The judge is a character. A lot of people before I read this have said that the judge is like the most evil character of all time, and he is. He's bad. I don't know about all time, but he's a very bad person. But he's also philosophical and mysterious and incredibly smart and really like otherworldly, which is represented kind of by his hairless body and his pale skin, and he seems like an alien almost. And the kid all throughout is just resisting the judge's temptations. The judge clearly has his eyes on the kid and is trying to bring him over, coax him over to his side. He's able to have this sway over everybody else, but for some reason he can't seem to get the kid to come over to his side of the fence. And in their final meetup, it's the same thing. But the question remains, what happened to the kid in the Jakes? What happened? Was he raped? Was he murdered? Did he kill the judge and become the new judge? Who knows? And I think that's what makes it so great. I personally had a theory throughout that the kid and the judge are the same person, two sides of the same coin. And the kid is his moral side viewing his evil side. Almost like a Tyler Durden Fight Club kind of thing. Like, the kid is a judge, but he views the judge with disdain because he hates that part of himself. This is why we never see the kid do anything bad with the gang, even though the gang is doing bad shit all the time. And all throughout, I mean, they meet in the opening scene. This is where they meet, and all throughout this book, they end up back together somehow. No matter what's separating them, they always end up back in the same place. And why is that? And I think that maybe in the end, this could be represented as maybe his evil side killing his good side. Maybe they've merged and become one. Who knows? I don't know. You tell me. Or you could just take it literally, and the judge literally raped and murdered the kid in an outhouse and then danced naked in a saloon. Either way, I love it. And I could keep going on and on and on about this, but I think I've talked about a majority of the things that I really loved. There is still so much more. If you're interested in reading literally a modern classic of literature, I cannot recommend this book more. However, the overly descriptive language and the sometimes confusing writing, it was a drawback for me at times all throughout the book. It's not like it just happens once It happens multiple times. And so I can't in good conscience say that this was just a straight up 5 out of 5 for me. So for that reason, I am going to give Blood Meridian a 4.8 out of 5. It's the only book I've ever given a 4.8 out of 5. It's amazing. It's worth reading. If you're up for a challenge and looking for a book that'll make you think, I couldn't recommend anything more highly than this. But what do you think? Have you read Blood Meridian? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Sound off in the comments. Let me know. I would love to talk about this book with anyone and everyone who would like to. Be sure to like the video, take a 6-shooter out and put a bullet in the subscribe button. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye.